the Donald Trump and the Supreme Court. Oh, I have to also, first of all, shield some of our merch. We've got some Zero Seats merch for the run-up to our big night-long stream.
7 p.m. on Thursday.
Yeah, it could be 10, 11, 12-hour-long stream. Who knows?
A marathon stream.
Yeah. Lots of guests. And there's a code, I think it's just 0 seats, to get a bunch of money off Gold Tier membership. And there's all sorts of merch, which is very short, only available for a short time. Okay. The King Donald, the first of his name, to be a king-elect. So what it was then, just if we play, before I play this short video, I wanted to play a bit from the BBC, just to give everyone, if anyone doesn't know, just sort of the general corporate mainstream.
Because I've heard something about this. Apparently it's now being ruled by the Supreme Court that he can basically just whack people whenever he wants.
Well, not just him, any president. Yeah. So we'll talk about the nature of presidential immunity from prosecution. We'll talk about that later. But of course, Donald's political enemies have alleged that he sort of tried an insurrection, didn't he, on January 6th?
Yeah.
At the end of his last term. They tried to impeach him for it. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Nancy and all the Dems tried to impeach him and failed. And then they kept sort of talking about an impeachment as though they had impeached him. They hadn't. They tried to and failed to. Nonetheless, after he left office, they have tried to bring prosecutions against him.
Yeah.
But it went to the Supreme Court as to whether he could be prosecuted for it or not.
Right.
And so that's what is coming up. So in the first case, they had hoped that it wouldn't even get before the Supreme Court. They would just be able to, the Justice Department just simply would be able to prosecute him for anything they dreamed up.
So which is the case that went to the Supreme Court that triggered this?
It is that thing that he
was it the Jan 6 case?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And now that this...
As well as to do with Georgia. Do you remember that in Georgia, there's a telephone call where he said, see if you can find more votes for me.
Yes.
And they said, oh, that's election interference. That's
the state of Georgia, not
that's election fraud. Yeah, not the country of Georgia in the caucuses.
So am I understanding this correctly, that now that Trump has all these king-like powers, that if he could imprison his main political rival on bullshit charges? Is that kind of what it allows him to do?
No.
Oh, okay.
No. So what this is there's many layers of politicking going on here.
Right.
And it's a bit difficult. Well, it's not actually all that difficult, but you've got to be careful with what's being said. So first of all, the first layer, sort of the top layer, if you like, I think we should start with, is what the mainstream media are saying, what somebody like the BBC, how they're presenting the story and the narrative.
Right.
So it's about 3.5 minutes long. But if we watch this whole video, so we as a base to begin our discussion.
The US Supreme Court has ruled that Donald Trump has some immunity from prosecution for official actions taken while he was in the White House. The landmark decision is likely to delay his trial for interfering in the 2020 election. The former president described the decision as a big win. Our North America editor Sarah Smith reports.
The powerful Supreme Court has the final say on what presidents can and cannot do. Today's historic ruling means a president can never be prosecuted for anything that's part of their official duties, but they do not have immunity for non-official acts. So what does this mean for the criminal cases against Donald Trump? When he spoke to supporters on January the 6th, was he officially acting as the president or as the losing candidate?
We fight like hell, and if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore.
Donald Trump is facing criminal charges related to the January the 6th riot and attempting to overturn the election results. As his supporters stormed the Capitol building, they chanted, "Hang Mike Pence," angry with the Vice President because he refused to block the certification of Joe Biden as president. Mr. Pence had to be evacuated from his office. Donald Trump cannot now be prosecuted for all the conversations in which he had been pressuring Mike Pence to overturn the election results. The Supreme Court did not say whether all the charges Donald Trump is facing are covered by presidential immunity. So it's going to have to be argued out in a lower court, which of his actions were official presidential acts and have immunity, and which were not, meaning he can still be prosecuted for them. Trump is also facing charges in the state of Georgia for trying to overturn the election result there. He phoned a local official and asked him to find more votes.
So, look, all I want to do is this. I just want to find 11,780 votes, which is one more than we have, because we won the state.
A court will have to rule on whether he was acting as president or not when he made that call. Justice Sonia Sotomayor, a more liberal judge, completely disagrees with the ruling, saying, "In every use of official power, the president is now a king above the law. If he orders the Navy SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political rival, immune. Organises a military coup to hold on to power, immune."
Until now, every president who has served in the United States has understood that he could be prosecuted if he engaged in criminal conduct while president. Going forward, presidents know they're free.
The most immediate effect of this ruling will be to further delay the 3 court cases Mr. Trump is still facing, making it all but certain they will not come to court before November's election.
Okay, that's the main thing. If you can stop playing that then, Samson. So there's a bit more there, but it's just fluff.
This is just reminding me why I haven't watched the BBC for 20 years.
Right. So almost everything there was spun to be as anti-Trump as possible. Almost every tiny bit of it, right? The little clips they decided to show and what information they decided to leave out.
Just the framing of everything.
Yeah, the framing. It's the classic lies by omission. What they're not saying, what they're not showing. And anyone who knows the story, who's been awake for the last few years, knows what really happened.
Yeah.
So first of all,
sorry, can I ask you a question before you start? Because they said that the ruling is supposed to be about immunity when the president acts officially.
Yeah.
So it has nothing to do with immunity when the president acts unofficially. But if you've seen the very beginning of the video, they asked whether he was acting as a president. So perhaps this is going to be the second stage of attack if this doesn't work. Because if now the discussion is about presidential immunity, but then they're going to ask, was he president or not at the time? So maybe it's the second stage of...
And he was. I mean, he just was. Until the next president is sworn in, he's still the president. So it's just nonsense. So let's just talk a little bit about presidential immunity. So the shills on there were trying to say that there's something massive is new, has changed, that now a president is like a king, he's above the law and all that sort of thing. Nothing essentially has changed. So when you take on the office of the President of the United States, you've got immunity from prosecution, right? So if you take, for example, and you can only be prosecuted if and when you've been, quote unquote, impeached. So if you take, for example, the story of Richard Nixon on my own channel, History Bro, check that out, like and subscribe. I've got one early series I did, I think a 5, 6, 7, 8-part series, all about Watergate, the Watergate scandal and the downfall of Richard Nixon. I've read a fair few books about Richard Nixon, and it's a very interesting story to me. So what happened with Nixon is he committed a few crimes, ordering people to break into places, right? So in the scheme of things, not terrible crimes, but nonetheless, definitely crimes. Breaking and entering and stealing some documents, things like that, planting bugs, things like that. Then also perjury, then going on record lying about it. So they were Nixon's crimes, right? And but they can't prosecute him because he's president. He's got immunity from prosecution. Just so it's not new, but his political enemies wanted to prosecute him for this. So they needed to impeach him and then be put on trial by the Senate. And then so after he's impeached, put on trial by the Senate, found guilty, then he'll face problems. So what happened in the case of Richard Nixon was it looked like that he would be impeached. He didn't have enough political support to prevent himself from being impeached. If that happened and it went to the Senate, again, the numbers were they would find him guilty. And then he's looking at prison time and stuff, right? So before he was impeached, he did cut a deal with the special prosecutors to resign from office. That's what happened to Nixon. So Nixon actually was never impeached and was never put on trial. So that's Nixon. Okay. But there's immunity.
Wasn't he given then some sort of blanket pardon by
Gerald Ford? Then
Ford.
Pardoned him. Yeah.
Yeah. But he couldn't have been pardoning him for an actual crime. It was just.
Well, there was crimes. Yeah, the breaking and entering stuff.
Oh, but nothing that he'd been found guilty of or anything.
But no. That's the question. And I think why pardon someone if they haven't broken?
So, quick word then about that: the presidential pardon. Presidential pardons are some of the most sweeping pardons it's possible. We don't really have any equivalent in Britain.
Right.
And if you get a presidential pardon, it's just a complete blanket. You're completely free. Your record is
kind of do. I think the monarch can do whatever the hell they want, and they're just outside the law.
I don't think so. Not since the 17th century, I'm afraid. No. Parliament is supreme.
I remember there was a bit on the Queen's website.
We cut off a king's head for such things.
Well, yeah. I mean, yeah. Okay. Apart from that,
anyway, so another example is Bill Clinton.
Right.
William Clinton did crimes, again perjury. He said, "I did not have sexual relations with Monica Lewinsky," when he did, and then there was proof on her dress,
right,
which she kept. You can infer what that's all about.
Yeah.
And he was impeached and found guilty, and his punishment for that was to be disbarred, because Bill, like a lot of politicians, was a lawyer originally.
Right.
He's not allowed to practice law in Arkansas anymore.
Oh, that will get him.
So yeah, that will show him. So Bill, I mean, in the olden days, in the mid 20th century or before, if that's so disgraceful that you probably would have thought he'd do a Nixon and resign out of disgrace. But of course, Bill has got no shame and just carried on.
Well, and also he's a Democrat, so held to a different standard.
Yeah, and the media, the media didn't pummel him day after day after day afterwards. After that, and still run interference for him to this day. But Bill again would have had immunity, and he had to go through the impeachment, all that sort of thing. So, all right, I don't want to labour the point too much. Presidents have got immunity.
Yeah.
From almost anything. You know, like someone like LBJ can just bomb civilians in North Vietnam or Cambodia or something, killing millions of people.
Or Obama can drone kill American civilians, that kind of stuff.
Right, yeah. There's no murder trials because they're immune.
Yeah.
But it's, okay, so anyway, that's the office of the president, acting as the office of the president. But then you can also, or as the Supreme Court now has decided, that make a distinction between that and sort of acting in a private capacity. So, say any president, not just Donald Trump, say any president just did sort of out of hours, if you like, they did some sort of minor crime that's obviously got nothing to do with the office of president.
Right.
Like say just in a Washington DC alley, they committed a sex crime or something.
Yeah.
They should still be prosecuted for that. It's not complete blanket immunity. So what that Justice Sotomayor said, it's just extreme hyperbole. Oh, we can send any president now can. I mean, Trump's not even the president. They're blaming him for it already, but he could send SEAL Team 6 to kill his enemies and he'd be immune. I don't think so. I think there would be impeachment and a trial and all sorts of things.
And actually, it's far more likely that a Democrat would do that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Way more likely.
Again, this is going down the road of what I've talked about, the parallels with the Marian and Sullan civil war in ancient Rome, where there's a tit for tat back and forth of destroying the sort of the rule of law and norms, and keep upping each other in terms of how far they're pushing the limits of what a republic can stand before the whole thing falls to bits. I feel like you wanted to say something, Dennis.
No, I'm just listening. Yeah.
Okay. So
I wanted to ask something about the official and the non-official, because there's a question: if there are official actions and the president acts according to, let's say, what the Constitution decrees as being the range of official actions, why do they need to have immunity? But an answer that someone gave me was that it has to do with litigiousness, because the reason they need this immunity is because the amount of people who just constantly disagree with each president and saying that they are violating the Constitution on bases that are very subjective,
spurious,
is increasing. And that makes governance basically impossible.
Yeah. No, exactly. I mean, that's what I'm talking about with the parallels with Marius and Sulla in ancient Rome. Yeah, just increasingly using sort of lawfare to try and undercut each other. And then it spills over into the real world and actually having mobs, partisan mobs on the streets. I mean, January 6th is one example, or the BLM Summer of Fire, Summer of Love, whatever that was, on the other side of the equation. A mob warfare until the actual rule of law has been broken and no one's really paying attention to it anymore. And then you have to get the army involved, and then you're into some sort of military leadership. You might still have presidents, but we know the person who controls the bottom line, who controls the force, will be the real leader, i.e. some general somewhere. Anyway, we'll see if it goes that far. So to carry on with the story, MSNBC, for example, doesn't like what the Supreme Court said, because it means that his trial for these trumped-up charges will be after November, and if he wins, then he can just get the State Department to just drop them entirely, because they are, pun intended, trumped-up charges against Trump, aren't they? So in other words, it is sort of a fairly significant win for the Donald. It does mean there's a few less headaches, quite a few less headaches for him between now and November. And the left side of the equation here are obviously butthurt about that quite badly. And they spin it and they like, so take this piece of work, for example. I've seen this guy, Neil Katyal. I've seen him doing the rounds on more than one thing. I see him on Channel 4 News, and here he is on MSNBC. Let's not even bother playing it, but he's just saying, oh, it's terrible. So we'll actually play a bit of it. Can we play a bit of it, Samson?
Let's bring in Neil Katyal. Neil.
Yeah, I want to return to this point from the dissents about the impact of this decision today on our democracy. And, in response to Chuck, and Chuck's absolutely right, the majority says there'll be case-by-case hearings to determine whether something is an official act or not. I just don't think, and I agree here with the dissent, that that's any sort of protection here. We've never needed those kinds of case-by-case hearings before. We've always just assumed a president is not above the law. And in these hearings, these case-by-case hearings, as Lisa points out, you can't even introduce any evidence of a president's motive, why he was trying to do something, like pressure the Justice Department or do whatever. And there'll be a presumption in favor.
I just can't bother to listen to these filth.
He's got a slappable face.
So it's like, so let's remember what happened January 6th. There was an augmented election, or what do they say? What's the word they use?
Fortified.
A fortified election.
Yes.
And there was some sort of backlash from the people.
Well, they basically said we want the process to play out properly and not be cut short. It wasn't an insurrection. It was just let's just do the process properly.
Yeah. And Trump, where they played a sound clip of him there saying, you've got to fight for your country. Don't play the clip where he explicitly says, don't cause any trouble.
Yeah.
And it's okay for AOC to go up on stage and say repeatedly, we've got to fight. And it sounds like she's really meaning it. The double standard again. But anyway, just the gaslighting that it's like that Trump is criminally negligible for something.
I constantly listen to them talking about Trump being somehow above the law, whereas there is also the distinction between the official and the unofficial acts.
Yeah,
so
it's just nonsense. The idea that he's not even the president. They're already making out like that he can do anything he wants. Of course, he can't. Well, there's a bit I had a bit teed up from Rachel Maddow, but you can imagine what she says. Of course, it's just spinning the entire narrative. So the Orange Man bad. It's just the same old, tired old thing. Assuming that the audience know nothing about the nature of presidential immunity.
Well, her audience probably doesn't.
Assuming the audience know nothing about the actual sequence of events. Assuming the audience knows nothing about the nature of what is or isn't just. All these things. It's just the most disgusting stuff. So actually, can we play the link with Biden there? And this is what Biden had to say about it.
This nation was founded on the principle that there are no kings in America.
Each of us is equal before the law.
Apart from Hunter Biden.
No one is above the law, not even the President of the United States.
Apart from the Burisma deal.
With today's Supreme Court decision on presidential immunity, that fundamentally changed for all practical purposes. Today's decision almost certainly means that there are virtually no limits
his eyes tracking the
what the president can do. This is a fundamentally new principle.
No, it isn't.
And it's a dangerous precedent because the power of the office will no longer be constrained by the law, even including the Supreme Court of the United States. The only limits will be self-imposed by the president alone. Nearly 4 years ago, my predecessor sent a violent mob to the U.S. Capitol.
No, he did
to
not.
stop the peaceful transfer of power.
No.
We all saw it with our own eyes. We sat there and watched it happen that day. Attack on the police.
Watched an innocent woman get shot in the chest at point blank range by a
mob
DC
literally
cop.
hunting
Saw
down the House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi.
Oh.
Gallows erected to hang the Vice President, Mike Pence.
Was it?
I think it's fair to say it's one of the darkest days in the history of America. Now the man who sent that mob to the U.S. Capitol is facing potential criminal conviction for what happened that day. And the American people deserve to have an answer in the courts before the upcoming election. The public has a right to know the answer about what happened on January 6th before they are asked to vote again this year. Now, because of today's decision, that is highly, highly unlikely.
No.
It's a terrible disservice to the people of this nation.
No,
I know I will respect the limits of the presidential powers I have for 3.5 years. But any president, including Donald Trump, will now be free to ignore the law. I concur with Justice Sotomayor's dissent today.
Of course she does.
Here's what she said. She said, in every use of official power, the president is now a king above the law. With fear for our democracy, I dissent. End of quote. So should the American people dissent. I dissent. May God bless you all, and may God help preserve our democracy. Thank you.
All right, so just complete nonsense there from a geriatric.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, just spin it. Now, one thing I would say is that what is dangerous, and which because we didn't watch Rachel Maddow and that Neil Katyal
I think we know what they're going to say.
And lots of other left-leaning commentators are saying, is that not only is this a blow to the rule of law or to America, but it's the nature of the Supreme Court itself. Let's blame the Supreme Court itself. The Supreme Justices have done something bad and wrong here. Now, that's dangerous. That's dangerous to call into question the very nature of the Supreme Court. That's something that needs to be reformed or done away with. So that's much, much more dangerous than 6 out of the 9 Supreme Court justices deciding that Trump shouldn't necessarily or should have immunity from some of the things he is alleged to have done in January that year. So I've got a quote here that I want to read out. It's quite long, it's a full paragraph long, but I want to read it out. It's from a great man, Alistair Cooke. There's a picture of Alistair Cooke. Now, he's an Englishman, and he wrote a great deal, many, many books, all about America. He lived in America. I think he went to Cambridge. And after Cambridge, he went to America in the 20s or the 30s. There he is as a fairly old man in the 1970s. I think he actually lived into extreme old age. Anyway, he knows American history inside out. He wrote lots and lots and lots of books about all aspects of America, from sort of the blues that you can find down in New Orleans through to the nature of the Constitution and the Supreme Court and all sorts of things. He famously did a long series called Letters from America, which anyone who's old enough to remember, it's a tiny bit before my time, but when I found out about Alistair Cooke when I was a bit younger, I gorged myself on his material. He's great. Very, very, very learned, interesting person. There's also a TV series, I think just called Alistair Cooke's America, which is a rehash of his Letters from America. And anyway, there's a great passage in that where he talks about the nature of the Supreme Court. So if I can read that out, hopefully I'll put this in context, that what's the dangerous thing here is not Trump It's not the nature of presidential immunity that's suddenly been changed and now they've got kings. Nothing is particularly has changed. If anything, some sort of justice has been done so that Trump doesn't have to go through the rigmarole of kangaroo prosecutions. So Alistair Cook says this. You see, the Constitution set up the president to keep an eye on the Congress and the Congress to keep an eye on the president. And to keep an eye on both of them was something else, a Supreme Court of judges appointed for life above the political battle. And yet, this is vital. They are able to decide the outcome of all the battles, political and social, of American life that engage the best and worst passions of the people. It is the watchdog of the ordinary American citizen, and there's nothing like it, i.e. in the rest of the world. I've been a working correspondent in this country for over 35 years. He was talking in the 1970s. And I only now realise how often I look back down the years at some really dangerous crisis that has happened and said, thank God for the Supreme Court. For these 9 men, because they were nearly always men, at least back then, for these 9 men who guard the rights of the ordinary citizen, and the ordinary citizen could be a president or a pimp, a banker or a bum, and the judge's brief and their Bible is the Constitution of the United States. They sit most days of the year and they look into the Constitution and they decide if something that somebody has done, anybody, is legal. Whether you can, for instance, run an undertaker's and also own stock in an insurance company. You cannot. Or whether a stage play of naked men and women running around shouting 4-letter words is constitutional. The 9 judges are never bound by precedent, even their own. They have defended the right, some right, of children to work in factories throughout the night, and then absolutely forbidden them to do just that. They have proclaimed the right to keep blacks and whites apart on trains, and then 60, 70 years later, proclaimed the right to put blacks and whites together on trains, in schools, theatres, everywhere. So you see, in the Constitution, like the Old Testament, can be cited to forgive one's enemies or gouge an eye for an eye. But make no mistake, this chamber, and he was talking from the chamber of the Supreme Court, make no mistake, this chamber is haunted by memorable faces and single sentences that have transformed the life of the American people. Chief Justice Marshall, quote, "It is emphatically the province and duty of the Judicial Department and nobody else to say what the law is." Mr. Justice Sutherland, "The liberty of the individual to do as he pleases, even in innocent matters, is not absolute." Again, these are all things that the Constitution doesn't explicitly say one way or the other. It's the Supreme Court that has to decide. Mr. Justice Harland said 80 years ago, against all 8 of his colleagues, the Constitution is colourblind. Mr. Justice Holmes, Oliver Wendell Holmes, said, "A Constitution is made for people of fundamentally differing views." Chief Justice Hughes, "The Constitution is what the judges say it is." I mean, wow. Imagine that. The Constitution is what we say it is. The buck stops with them in all sorts of ways. Alistair Cook goes on to say, "And so it is," meaning the Constitution is what the judges say it is. "And so it is. And since a majority of the 9 decide everything, the Constitution is what 5 judges say it is." Now, this sounds very alarming, but these 9 men are human and of various character, and there's nothing rigid about the authority of the Constitution. It bends to the moral winds of the time. But if the judges are behind the times, and if their integrity as honourable men is seriously questioned, then the court and the country are in trouble. But I've noticed that an odd and impressive thing can happen when a man is appointed to the court. The president may think that he has installed a ventriloquist's doll, but suddenly the man is paid for life and can become himself a quite different character from the one the president ordered up. And so remarkably often, the court has kept the country on an even keel in the stormiest of times. Believe me, it will be a bad day for America if ever the mass of them come to lose faith in this court as their fair and final protector. End quote. Now that's a profound thing there, that presidents come and go, Congresses come and go, get swapped out for new people. The Supreme Court is more important than that. It is almost like a sacred thing. So the sacred thing is the Constitution, which they defend. Right, which they interpret the Constitution is what they say it is, quite literally. So to call into question, as the Dems do quite often, or they say things like, why do we have to have 9? Why don't we have more than 9? And we'll pack it out with our guys and stuff. Again, this is how republics fracture and die. And that's what they're doing. It's someone like Rachel Maddow doesn't seem to pause for a moment before just saying, oh, it's the Supreme Court. They're the problem. They're the issue. We need to take issue with them. Well, America will be in trouble if they do.
I think people forget what was the reaction by US Democrats to the election of Trump in 2016 when they were talking about the system with the electors. They were against it because they were saying Hillary Clinton won the popular vote, and Trump is president because he won due to the electors. And that is what the Constitution says.
Yeah, it's the way it's always been.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can win the quote-unquote popular vote, i.e. literally more people voted for you, but it's not about that.
Yes.
It's about the electoral college. Yeah. And that's the way it's always been. But yeah, they're just butthurt that they lost.
But it's interesting.
Saying anything, doing anything, throwing the Republic itself under the bus so that they can win.
But there's a deeper thing that is interesting here, because the system of the electors, of the electorates, of the districts, is based on the idea that just because you live somewhere doesn't mean that you're about to vote for some other place. There has to be a sort of local representation.
Yeah, right.
That's why they have the seats within each state.
Yeah.
And this is something that possibly Democrats really don't like, the US Democrats.
Yeah.
Who, by the way I see it, they're much more in favor of a very paternalistic democracy that I think is an oxymoron.
There's always been a struggle politically for the heart and soul of America, going back to Washington and Adams and Hamilton and Jefferson and all these guys. The balance between the federal government and the states, and America as we have it today is really Jefferson won that battle. I've done some interesting content with Benjamin Boyce talking about this. Again, go to History Bro, my channel on YouTube. Find the conversation or two I've had with Benjamin Boyce, talking about how Hamilton and Jefferson, their view of what America should be, how it's set up, whether it's the central government in Washington, D.C., the federal government should be sort of all dominant, or whether the states should, to what extent the states have autonomy over their own state. And so, yeah, it's still a thing to this day where people are of different minds about it.
I said the electors, it's electorates, I think. Sorry.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, right. So I've maybe run a touch over time there, but Trump did nothing wrong. And fingers crossed for him in November, and the Dems can suck it.
Hi folks, thanks for watching. If you'd like to support us and you enjoy the work we do and you want to help us keep the lights on, because of course we're demonetized on YouTube, go over to lotuseats.com, sign up for only £5 a month, and go and watch some of the amazing premium content there, such as Connor Tomlinson's interviews with fascinating people. He has previously interviewed ex-Prime Minister Liz Truss, but recently he has interviewed Mary Harrington, a kind of dissident feminist who recognises, as we do, that we are being governed by a uniparty and the state of affairs needs change. Also, while you're at it, go and follow us on Twitter at lotuseaters_com, and we will see you soon.